The message arrived like a spark dropped onto dry gasoline. She is waiting for you at Lumiere. Do not blow it. Mark Bennett stared at the glowing text on his old phone, his breath catching as if someone had elbowed him in the ribs. The sentence looked wrong, felt wrong, and yet it tugged at a small, buried part of him he had spent years refusing to feed. Hope, or something dangerously close to it. 8 hours earlier, the lobby of Heart Capital Group had been an orchestra of polished shoes, clipped conversations, and ambition thick enough to taste. Mark moved through it like a shadow, with a cart pushing the wheels along the marble floor, while the lemon scent of disinfectant curled behind him. His movements were steady, practiced the routine of a man who had spent a long time trying not to take up space. That was why he noticed immediately when the sharks turned toward him. Brandon Cole stepped out of the elevator, surrounded by his entourage, all in tailored suits and smugness sharpened into a weapon. Brandon was the kind of man who believed charm and cruelty were interchangeable currencies. This morning, he wore his smirk like a custom accessory. Bennett, he called across the lobby too loudly. Big night, my friend. Mark kept wiping the glass door, pretending he had not heard. But Brandon approached anyway with the smooth swagger of a man who had never been ignored in his life. Be gracious, Brandon continued, leaning an elbow against the reception desk. We're trying to do something nice for you. Nice, echoed one of the younger analysts, his grin stretching too wide. A blind date. With a woman who, get this, has seen you around and thinks you're a good guy. Mark froze for half a second. Then he resumed wiping. He had learned long ago that silence was its own armor. I appreciate the thought, he said carefully, but no thank you. Brandon pushed off the desk with a slow, exaggerated sigh. Come on, Bennett. It is time you live a little. You work hard. You keep to yourself. You deserve a night out. Lumiere, 8 o'clock, table for 2. She will be there. I said no. Mark repeated, but his voice carried less conviction than he wished. Another man chimed in, piling pressure on like it was a sport. She is beautiful, smart, quiet, a perfect match for you. Mark blinked. A match. The suggestion felt like a joke, but their faces were arranged in masks of sincerity so rehearsed he could not quite determine where the cruelty began. He refused 3 more times. They insisted 3 more times. What weakened him was not their persistence, but the whisper of possibility he had not invited. Later that day, when he told Chloe that Daddy might be meeting someone new, her 8-year-old face lit up with unfiltered excitement. She had launched herself into his arms and declared she would pick out his best shirt. Her joy became the final nudge that pushed him toward a decision he still doubted, even as he rode the bus home. Now, as he stepped into the rooftop restaurant Lumiere Chicago, glittering beneath floor-to-ceiling windows, he felt the weight of every wrong instinct pressing against him. The place was elegant, breathtaking, and suffocating. The kind of place people like him cleaned, not dined in. He tugged at the collar of his only good shirt, a dark gray button-down Chloe had insisted, made him look like one of the heroes she drew in her sketchbook. He saw her immediately. The woman sitting by the window wore a navy dress that looked expensive without trying. Her dark hair was pulled into a sleek knot that revealed a strong jawline, high cheekbones, and an expression that could freeze a wildfire. She sat with perfect posture, fingers interlaced, eyes sharp and assessing. Mark swallowed hard. He walked toward her. Hi, he began softly. I'm Mark. Her gaze lifted cool and precise. Then she spoke with the calm authority of someone accustomed to rooms falling silent when she opened her mouth. Do you have any idea who I am? The question hit like a sudden gust of winter air. Mark blinked. No, he answered. Should I? Before she replied, a ripple of muffled laughter drifted from a corner booth. Mark turned his head. His stomach clenched. There they were, Brandon and his pack, watching, recording, smirking. In that brutal instant, the truth crystallized. This was not a date. It was a performance, a joke, a trap set for applause. His heart thudded painfully. The woman's voice sliced through the humiliation. "I am Olivia Hart," she said. "Chief Executive Officer of Hart Capital. You clean my building." Heat rushed to Mark's face. He pushed back his chair muscles, taut with the urge to flee. "I should go." "No," she said sharply, and the single word held power that pinned him in place. "You will sit. You will order dinner. And you will not give those men the satisfaction of seeing you run." Her fury was not directed at him, but at the architects of the scene. It simmered just beneath her composed exterior, an invisible blaze. Mark sat again slowly. His hands trembled beneath the table. Then everything changed. The elevator chimed. Two small figures appeared moments later. Chloe darted across the restaurant, ponytail bouncing as she waved excitedly. Behind her was Mia Hart, Olivia's 6-year-old daughter, moving with hesitant, careful steps. The universe had shifted its axis. Two children now stood beside a table built from lies. Chloe scrambled into the empty chair next to Mark and smiled brightly at Olivia. "Hi, I'm Chloe. Are you Dad's friend?" Olivia stiffened. Mark opened his mouth to clarify, but Chloe had already leaned forward, fascinated by Mia. "Hi, you're really pretty. Do you want to sit by me?" Mia stared silent and tense. She had not spoken in a year. Chloe softened. "It's okay. You don't have to talk. Sometimes I get quiet too." Mia's eyes wavered. Her fingers twitched. Mark felt something stir deep inside him. A muscle memory. A grief he had buried. A gift he had abandoned. And that was when the idea struck him with quiet clarity. He reached for a sugar packet. Olivia watched bewildered. Chloe leaned in. Mia held her breath. Mark tore the corners, sprinkled a few crystals onto the dark wood, and trapped a quivering droplet of water beside them. "A wishing star," he whispered, "and the moon that keeps it safe." The crystals glittered. Mia's eyes widened. He nudged the droplet. It slid into the sugar. The star disappeared in a swirl of silver. The moon gave it a hug, Mark murmured. "Now the wish is safe." Mia inhaled sharply, then reached for a sugar packet of her own, offering it to him with trembling fingers. A silent request. A connection. A miracle. And that was the precise moment Olivia Hart realized the night had transformed into something none of them had been prepared to face. The true story had just begun. Silence settled over the table, the way fresh snow smothers a street, pure cold and absolute. Olivia Hart sat poised with her hands, folded the picture of icy control, but her pulse hammered beneath the silk of her dress. She had not expected this night. She had not expected this man. And she certainly had not expected their daughters to appear at the same moment the universe chose to humiliate her. Mia stood beside her, clutching the sleeve of Olivia's blazer with small, tense fingers. The child's dark eyes absorbed everything. The city lights, the linen tablecloth, the strangers. She did not speak. She had not spoken in a year. Trauma had locked her inside herself, sealing her voice somewhere Olivia could not reach, no matter how many specialists she paid, or how many tears she shed in private when no one could see. Across the table, Chloe Bennett burst forward with the unfiltered joy of an 8-year-old. "Dad, I found you. Aunt Lee said you were almost done, and I could say hi before going home." Mark's face collapsed into a soft, helpless smile. "Chloe, sweetheart, you were supposed to stay with Aunt Lee until She had to run back to work," Chloe said quickly, already sliding into the empty chair beside him. "But it's okay. I wanted to see your friend." Olivia tensed at the word friend. Even Mark blinked, unsure whether to correct it. Chloe did not notice the tension. Her bright eyes landed on Mia with delighted curiosity. "Hi, I'm Chloe. You're really pretty. Want to sit with me?" Mia stared at Chloe's outstretched hand. For a moment, her face twisted, not in fear, but in the aching loneliness of someone desperately wanting to connect and having no idea how. Olivia's heart cracked. This was the part that always hurt the most. Chloe did not pull back. She only softened her smile. "It's okay. You don't have to talk if you don't want to. My dad says sometimes people talk in different ways." Mark stiffened. He had never said those words to Chloe in that exact way, but he had taught her to read people gently with a soft instinct he thought he had buried. Hearing her speak it aloud felt like a ghost tapping on his shoulder. Mia's lower lip trembled. She looked down at the table's shoulders, hunched in apology for a crime she could not name. That was when Mark reached for the small ceramic bowl in the center of the table. He picked up a sugar packet, tore a tiny corner off, and sprinkled a few white crystals onto the dark wood. Chloe leaned in immediately, already enchanted, but Mark did not look at her. He kept his focus deliberately away from Mia's face. He dipped his finger into his water glass, lifted a single quivering droplet, and let it fall beside the sugar. "Look," he whispered, his voice different now, softer than Olivia had heard all evening, a wishing star and a moon following it. The crystals caught the light and glittered. The droplet shivered like something alive. Mia's eyes flicked up. Chloe breathed, "Whoa." Mark nudged the droplet with his finger. It rolled slow and delicate until it touched the sugar. The star melted instantly into the moon, swirling into a tiny pool of silver. "The moon is hugging the star," Mark murmured. "It keeps the wish safe." This time Mia's breath caught audibly. Olivia felt the world tilt. Her throat tightened emotion, pushing up through the armor she wore daily. She had watched world-renowned therapists spend hours trying to coax a reaction from her daughter and fail. Yet here, in a rooftop restaurant, a janitor with tired eyes and gentle hands had cracked her daughter's silence with nothing more than sugar and imagination. Mia reached slowly, like touching a fragile dream, and picked up a sugar packet of her own. She placed it in front of Mark, a silent request. Olivia did not breathe. She could not. Her daughter had initiated something, anything, for the first time in 12 months. Chloe clapped softly. "She likes your magic, Dad." Magic. Olivia felt the word settle heavily in her chest. She had forgotten what hope even felt like. Mark looked at Mia, careful not to overwhelm her. "Would you like another star?" Mia nodded. A nod. A real, willing, conscious nod. And in that tiny gesture, Olivia Hart's entire world cracked open. She felt awe. She felt terror. And for the first time in a year, she felt the smallest flicker of belief that her daughter might one day find her way back. None of them knew it, but the cruel prank that was meant to break two people had just bound their futures together. The night outside, Lumiere felt colder than it should have. A sharp Chicago wind curled around the rooftop restaurant and sliced along the sidewalks as Mark Bennett stepped out with Chloe's small hand tucked in his. The air carried the metallic taste of humiliation, and every breath scraped his lungs raw. He kept walking, focusing on the rhythm of Chloe's footsteps, small and trusting beside him. He prayed she would not ask questions he could not answer. But Chloe was perceptive in ways that unnerved him. "Dad," she said, looking up at him with wide brown eyes, "was that lady really your friend? She seemed kinda mad, but kinda sad too." Mark forced a thin smile. "We just met, sweetheart." He hoped that would end it, but the restaurant door swung open sharply behind them, unleashing a new gust of wind and the click of heels that carried purpose. Mark Bennett. He closed his eyes. Olivia Hart's voice was unmistakable, precise, commanding, urgent. Chloe instinctively tightened her grip on his hand as he turned. Olivia approached them under the street lamp's pale glow. The harsh restaurant lighting had hidden nothing but, here beneath the cold night sky, Mark saw another layer to her. Her posture was rigid, but her eyes dark, sharp, stormy, held something he had not expected. Not arrogance, not superiority. Need. Fierce, burning need. "I need to speak with you," she said. "Alone." Mark stepped subtly in front of Chloe. "If this is about the joke inside, then it's over." "Let it go. I'm going home." "No," Olivia said, her voice dropping into something that almost trembled. "It is not over. Not until you tell me exactly who you are." "I told you," Mark said, irritation sliding beneath his calm. "I'm the night janitor. I clean the floors of your building. That is all." His statement did nothing to her. She stared at him as if dissecting each word, crushing it in her mind, rejecting it on sight. "I pulled your employee file," she said. A cold jolt shot through him. "You had no right. I had every right. You sat with my daughter tonight. She responded to you. Do you understand what that means?" He tightened his jaw. "You don't need to drag me into no," she cut in voice sharp, brittle. "Listen to me. She has not reacted to anyone in a year. Not to doctors, not to specialists, not to me. But she looked at you. She handed you the sugar packet. She reached for you." Chloe's eyes widened. "The quiet girl can't talk," Olivia hesitated, her strength flickering. "No, she can't. But she tried. Tonight was the first time she tried anything." Mark felt a sting in his chest. A memory. A ghost. His fingers twitched slightly as if reaching for tools he swore he would never use again. Olivia stepped closer, lowering her voice into something raw. "Luck does not create a response like that. Skill does. Knowledge does. Experience does. So I want the truth. Who are you really?" He took a slow breath. The weight of her gaze was unbearable. He could feel Chloe's presence at his side, warm, steady, innocent. He hated the vulnerability clawing up his spine. He hated the past she was trying to exhume. He hated that she was right. "You're wrong," he said quietly, jaw tight. "I am just a janitor." "No," she whispered. "You are lying." The words sliced through him. He stepped back, trying to retreat into himself, but Olivia followed with the relentless determination of a mother cornered by grief. "Who taught you that technique with the sugar? Who taught you how to approach her without triggering panic? Who taught you that silence can be an invitation instead of a barrier?" He stared at the ground. "Stop." But she would not stop. "Tell me who you were." The past rose like a rushing tide. His wife's pale face, hospital machines, the sterile scent of antiseptic, his little girl sleeping in his lap while he whispered promises he could not keep. He tried to breathe around the crushing ache in his chest. Chloe's hand squeezed his. He opened his eyes. "I used to be," he said slowly, painfully, "a pediatric speech and language therapist." Olivia inhaled sharply. He continued, voice hollow. "I worked with trauma cases. Children who stopped speaking. Children who hid inside their minds. I was good at it. Very good." A brief flicker crossed her face, hope sharp and desperate. "But that was another life," he said quickly, voice breaking. "A life I failed at. A life that ended the day my wife died." Chloe looked up at him, shocked. "Dad." Mark knelt beside her, smoothing her hair with shaking fingers. "It's okay, sweetheart." He stood slowly facing Olivia again, lamplight illuminated the grief knitted into every line of his expression. "I can't help your daughter." "You already did," Olivia whispered. He blinked hard, jaw clenching. "No. I stumbled into a moment. That's all. I can't do this again. I can't be that person again." Olivia stepped closer. "You don't get to decide that. Mia needs, she is not my responsibility." Mark snapped louder than he meant to. Chloe flinched at the tone, and guilt crashed through him instantly. "I'm sorry," he murmured to Chloe before looking at Olivia again. "I can't." The storm inside Olivia fractured. Confusion, anger, desperation. Why? Why would you walk away now? He shook his head, voice barely audible. "Because I already tried to save the most important person in my world. And I failed. I don't have miracles left. My daughter will not watch me break again." Olivia's breath caught. For the first time she understood. This was not stubbornness. This was fear. A deep, bone-deep terror. "Mark," she whispered, "you did not fail your wife." He flinched as though she had struck him. "Leave it alone." He took Chloe's hand. She leaned into him, still watching Olivia with wide, uncertain eyes. Olivia stepped forward, but Mark stepped back. "Please," she said, softer than he had ever heard her speak. But he was already turning away. He walked into the cold Chicago night, his daughter's hand in his past snarling at his heels, and Olivia Hart standing beneath the street lamp, gripping the fragile threads of hope he had just ripped from her grasp. And even in the shadows, she made a vow. This was not over. Not by a long shot. The following night, Hart Capital Group felt different. The polished hallways, normally humming with a cold corporate pulse, seemed to watch Mark Bennett as he pushed his janitorial cart through the empty executive wing. Word had already spread about the blind date fiasco. Whispers traveled faster than the elevators. Some looked at him with pity, others with poorly masked amusement. None of it surprised him. He had spent 3 years mastering the art of invisibility. Tonight, however, every glance felt like a pointed finger. As he reached the break room outside the finance department, he heard laughter break through the quiet. The doors swung open, and Brandon Cole sauntered out, tied loose eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a man who believed he controlled the board and the pawns. Well, Brandon drawled, leaning against the doorframe. "Chicago's hottest romantic lead. How does it feel, Bennett, headlining the funniest story this company has heard all year?" Mark kept his eyes on his cart. "Excuse me, Mr. Cole. I need to clean." Brandon smirked, amused by the lack of reaction. "Relax. I'm sure she let you down gently, right? A janitor and a CEO. It's practically a fairy tale." Mark rolled the cart forward. Brandon blocked him for a long, pointed second before finally stepping aside. The corridor swallowed Mark again, but the sting of humiliation clung to him like smoke. It took him nearly 2 hours to finish the routine tasks. His muscles ached. His mind replayed Olivia Hart's voice again and again. "Tell me who you were." And worse, you already helped her. He wanted silence. Instead, fate gave him the sound of shattering glass. The crash came from the executive kitchen. A mess of coffee beans and glass littered the floor. A bottle of thick caramel syrup lay overturned, its contents forming a sticky lake that stretched across the pristine white tiles. Mark froze. This was no accident. It was too deliberate, too perfectly timed. Behind him, Brandon appeared again, leaning drunkenly against the counter. "Clumsy me," he slurred without a hint of remorse. "You'll take care of that, won't you? See you in the morning, Bennett." He slapped Mark's shoulder and walked out, leaving the disaster behind, like a signature. Mark stared at the mess. Cleaning it would take hours. He would miss the last bus. Chloe would be asleep before he got home. The anger that rose inside him was sharp and unfamiliar, a heat he had kept smothered for years. He gripped the mop handle until his knuckles whitened. When he finally finished, it was close to midnight. He stored the supplies, rubbed the aching knots in his shoulders, and stepped into the hallway to grab his coat from the custodial closet. The door swung open. He froze. 2 security guards stood waiting. Mr. Bennett said Henderson, the head of security, his voice stripped of the friendliness he usually showed. "We need you to come with us." Confusion flickered through Mark. "Is something wrong? There's been a theft in the executive offices," Henderson replied. "We need to search your locker." His stomach dropped. "I didn't take anything." The second guard avoided his eyes. "Let's just get this over with." Inside the closet, Henderson opened Mark's locker. A spare shirt, a paperback novel, a thermos. Normal. Ordinary. Then Henderson reached into the coat pocket. His fingers closed around something metallic. He pulled it out. A gold fountain pen gleamed under the fluorescent light, expensive and unmistakably out of place. Henderson's expression hardened. "Can you explain this?" Mark's world tilted. "That's not mine. I have never even seen that pen." Henderson sighed, as if exhausted by the predictability of the denial. "Mr. Abernathy is already on his way down. He intends to press charges." Mark felt the floor fall out from under him. He saw Chloe's face, the fear in her eyes the day her mother died, the promises he made to protect her from everything. If he was arrested, she would lose him too. He whispered, "Please, this is a setup." But before anyone could respond, the door opened sharply. Olivia Hart stood there, framed in the hall, light like judgment and salvation combined. Her gaze swept the room, the guards, the pen, the shock in Mark's eyes. Then she said, with the steel of a leader and the fire of a mother, "What is going on here?" Sunday arrived wrapped in a deceptive stillness, the kind that suggested ease, even when tension simmered beneath the surface. Lincoln Park buzzed gently with families, joggers, and the hum of early spring. But Mark Bennett sat alone on a weathered bench, watching Chloe spin on the carousel, her laughter floating in circles. He tried to let her joy settle him, but the events of the past nights clung to him like soot, and exhaustion gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. The memory of the planted pen, the interrogation room, and Olivia Hart sweeping in like a force of nature lingered with unsettling clarity. He rubbed his hands together, feeling an ache buried so deep it had become part of him. He told himself he came here every Sunday for Chloe, for stability, for their ritual, not because he needed the quiet routine as much as she did. But as he watched her hop off the carousel and wave at him, he felt the smallest crack of warmth break through the chill lodged inside his chest. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, without fear of the next blow. Then he saw her. Olivia Hart walked toward him down the paved path, her stride slower than usual, her daughter's tiny hand clinging to hers. She wore jeans and a soft gray sweater instead of her armor of tailored suits, her hair loosely tied back and vulnerable strands brushing her cheek. The transformation unsettled him more than any confrontation in a conference room could have. Mia walked beside her, silent as always, her eyes fixed on the carousel with quiet yearning. Mark stood abruptly, the bench creaking behind him. His voice came out sharper than intended. "What are you doing here?" Olivia paused, meeting his gaze head-on, even though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. "My daughter wanted to go to the park." When he didn't respond, she added softly, "This park." Chloe spotted Mia first, waving enthusiastically as she approached. Without hesitation, she tugged Mia toward the swings, chattering about who could fly higher. Mia hesitated only for a breath, before letting Chloe lead her, her fingers trembling but willing. Something fragile and astounding passed between the girls, and Olivia's breath faltered as she watched. Faltered as, "She wants connection," Olivia said quietly, stepping closer to Mark. "You saw that last night. And she responded to you in a way she hasn't responded to anyone." Her voice was steady, but fear hid beneath each word. "I cannot ignore that. And neither can you." Mark lifted a hand to pinch the bridge of his nose, fighting the truth pressing in on him. "I told you," he said. "I can't help her." Olivia's expression tightened, not with anger this time, but with raw, pleading frustration. "You can. You already did. She handed you that sugar packet. She nodded to you. You unlocked something I have begged specialists for months to even touch." She swallowed hard. "You do not get to pretend that meant nothing." Mark turned away, staring at the swing set where Chloe pushed Mia, gently narrating how the wind felt like magic. The simplicity of it made his chest hurt. He wanted to belong to a world that uncomplicated, but he knew better. "You do not understand," he said, his voice low. "I tried to save someone once. Someone I loved more than anything. And I couldn't. I cannot risk that again." Olivia stepped around to face him, her eyes shimmering with defiance and fear mingled. "Your wife's death was not your failure," she said, her voice trembling as the truth scraped out of her. "You could not cure cancer, but you think that means every child you help is a test you might fail." She exhaled shakily. "That is not how healing works." He stiffened, grief darkening his features. "Leave her out of this." "No," Olivia whispered, her voice breaking. "Because if you cannot say her name without drowning, then you are punishing yourself, not protecting my daughter." Mark took a step back, as if her words were a physical strike. The truth she carved open inside him made him feel exposed, raw, desperate to run. He looked at Chloe, bright and fearless on the swings, and then at Mia, silent, small, but smiling for the first time he had ever seen. Olivia followed his gaze, her voice barely a breath. "Mark, I am terrified. Every single day. I am terrified that Mia will never speak again, that she will grow up imprisoned in her silence, that I will fail her the way her father did." She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "I cannot do this alone. And I am asking you not as a CEO, not as someone who owes you anything, but as a mother who is drowning." The wind drifted between them, carrying Chloe's laughter and Mia's soft attempt at a giggle. Mark's defenses faltered. He felt the familiar instinct stir in him, the one he had sworn to bury. The instinct to kneel down beside a child and help them build a bridge out of their darkness. He inhaled deeply, chest trembling. "I do not know if I can help her," he said. "I do not know if I can be that person again. But," his voice cracked, "I also cannot watch her like this and pretend I don't see her." Olivia froze, hope sparking so sharply it almost hurt. "Mark." He held up a hand. "No contract," he said firmly, "no payment, no company interference. And if I feel I cannot help her, I stop immediately. No pressure, no guilt, no arguments." Olivia nodded without hesitation, tears clinging to her lashes. "Agreed, all of it. And no one at Heart Capital can know," he added. "This stays between us." "Yes," she whispered, the relief in her voice trembling like a fragile cord. "I promise." Mark watched as Mia tilted her head toward Chloe, her lips curved in something that looked very close to a smile. The sight pierced him with both pain and fragile hope. He exhaled slowly, surrendering to the truth he could no longer deny. "We start this week," he said. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words sink into her bones. When she opened them, gratitude and awe shimmered there like sunlight. And on that windy Sunday afternoon in Lincoln Park, beneath the sound of children laughing and swings creaking the path for all 4 of their lives, quietly shifted, setting destiny in motion. 2 nights later, Mark Bennett stood inside the marble entryway of Olivia Hart's penthouse, feeling intensely aware of every heartbeat in his chest. The place looked nothing like a home. It was a cathedral of silence, all white walls and gleaming surfaces, the kind of space where echoes felt like trespassers. He wiped his hands against his jeans, suddenly conscious of the faint scent of disinfectant that clung to him, no matter how hard he scrubbed after work. He did not belong here, and yet here he was, stepping into a world that had been frozen long before he ever entered it. Olivia appeared beside him, moving with a poise that seemed more brittle than strong today. "Mia is waiting in the living room," she said. And though her voice aimed for calm, a faint tremor slipped beneath it. She led him through a corridor lined with minimalist art that seemed deliberately impersonal. Not a single photograph. No sign of life, except the faint glow of recessed lighting. The living room opened like a pristine museum exhibit, dominated by a large white rug scattered with untouched toys, arranged neatly but without warmth. Mia sat at the center of the rug, her knees folded under her, her small hands gripping the edges of her dress. Her dark eyes lifted when she sensed movement, but she did not shift, did not speak, did not retreat. She simply watched him with quiet apprehension. Mark knelt slowly, keeping enough distance that she would not feel cornered. He did not say her name. He did not offer a smile she would not trust. He let the silence settle around them, like a soft blanket giving her the choice to either draw closer or drift away. He had learned long ago that silence was not the enemy. Silence could be an invitation. Behind him, Olivia hovered near the kitchen island, pretending to check emails on her tablet. But her body betrayed her. Shoulders tense, breath-shallow fingers tangled together. Her presence in the room was too heavy, too charged with hope and fear. Mark turned his head slightly. "Could you give us the room, please?" he asked gently. Olivia blinked in surprise, as if no one had ever asked her to step back from anything in her life. Control was her default. Distance was her armor. But after a heartbeat, she nodded and retreated down the hall. She left the door open a few inches, enough for her to hear, but not enough to intrude. Even from there, Mark could feel the weight of her anxiety seeping through the air. He exhaled softly, grounding himself. A child's silence was a fortress built over months of pain. You did not storm it. You waited for a door to appear. He reached into his canvas bag and removed 2 items, a smooth river stone and a bright blue crayon. He didn't look at Mia while he worked. He simply began drawing on the stone with slow, deliberate strokes, letting the soft, scraping sound fill the room. A smiling face emerged on the stone, crooked and simple. He placed it between them on the rug and then took out another stone, this one blank, and set a red crayon beside it, without pushing it toward her. Minutes passed. 10, maybe 15. The penthouse absorbed every sound, until even breathing felt amplified. Mia watched him, her gaze flicking between the stone and the crayon. She did not reach for it. She did not look away either. She existed in the space between fear and curiosity, and Mark remained still, giving her time. Then it happened. Her small hand inched forward, not toward the stone, but toward his hand. With careful, trembling fingers, she began drawing on the back of it with the red crayon. A single wavering line, then another. She did not speak, but the gesture was clearer than words. Connection, trust, a quiet surrender. Mark did not move. He did not flinch. He let her finish the drawing entirely on his skin, In that tiny, fragile motion, the silence shifted from a barrier to a bridge, and he felt something inside him lift, something he had not allowed himself to feel since before his wife died. Purpose. Quiet but steady. Down the hall, Olivia pressed a hand to her mouth as tears gathered unbidden. She had hired specialists across the city, flown in experts paid for every possible treatment. They had charts, theories, and sterile offices filled with clinical questions. None of them had coaxed even a glimpse of emotion from Mia. None had earned her touch. But this man, this janitor she had been deceived into meeting, was changing everything with stones and crayons and silence. When the session reached an hour, Mark gently collected the stones, but left the one Mia had drawn on beside her. She placed her fingertips on it, her expression softening for the briefest moment. He stood slowly, muscles stiff from kneeling so long, and Olivia practically rushed into the room. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice cracking with hope she tried to hide. Mark wiped his palms on his jeans again. "We are getting to know each other," he said simply. "That is all for tonight." Olivia wanted more. She wanted a miracle packaged in clear affirmation. But Mark's steady restraint grounded her. She inhaled and nodded, swallowing the 1,000 questions rising in her chest. He walked toward the door, lifting his bag, when something small caught her eye. On the rug beside the stone with the red line lay a drawing Mia must have retrieved from the desk. 2 stick figures, a tall one smiling and holding hands with a smaller one. A single red line connected them like an unbroken thread. Olivia picked it up with trembling fingers. Her breath hitched. "She drew this," she whispered. Mark paused in the doorway, but didn't turn around. "She's beginning to tell stories," he said softly. "That is good." Olivia stared at the drawing, her vision blurring. This is the first picture she has made in months. Mark nodded once quietly, carrying the weight of her awe with silent respect. As he left the penthouse and stepped into the cold night air, he realized his hands were still tinted faintly red from the crayon marks Mia had drawn on them. He did not wash them off right away. For the first time in years, he felt the faint pulse of hope in his fingertips. The old life he had buried deep was stirring, persistent and alive, refusing to remain silent any longer. For weeks, the quiet ritual continued. After his night shift, Mark Bennett would climb the elevator to the penthouse at the top of Hart Tower, stepping into the silent white living room where Mia waited on the rug. Each session started with stillness and ended with a new thread of connection stitched carefully between them. Mia drew more lines, more shapes, more stories. And with each story, Olivia Hart found herself drifting closer to the fragile hope she had long abandoned. But hope has a way of attracting enemies. Brandon Cole watched this shift from the shadows of his glass office 3 floors below. He noticed Olivia dismiss her driver and walk out of the building alone in the evenings. He noticed how her face softened, how her posture changed, how something human returned to a woman he preferred, carved in steel. What he did not understand was the reason behind it. All he saw was the threat. A rumor began as a whisper. A joke told too loudly near the elevators. A pointed question at the coffee machine. Brandon ensured it traveled upward, not downward, where the janitorial crew worked, but into the veins of the company itself. By the end of the second week, entire departments repeated it as fact. The CEO was distracted, compromised, involved with the night janitor. Brandon delivered the final blow with surgical cruelty. During a closed board meeting, he leaned forward, fingers tented, voice dripping false concern. "We must ask ourselves if Olivia Hart is still fit for leadership," he said, letting his gaze drift lazily across the room. her judgment lately. It raises questions. He had planted enough seeds. Now he watered them. The board demanded a full town hall to stabilize investor confidence. The message was clear: she would be cornered in front of her entire company, her authority stripped layer by layer. Mark learned of the meeting only because he was assigned to the event, tasked with checking badges at the auditorium entrance. He tried to stay invisible, but the stares burned through him like acid. Pity, disgust, curiosity. The weight of 1,000 assumptions pressed on him as he stood against the back wall after the room filled. Then Olivia Hart walked onto the stage. She looked immaculate in charcoal gray, but Mark, watching from the shadows, could see the tension in her shoulders, the tightness in her jaw. The town hall began with the typical speeches: financial projections, strategic shifts, buzzwords meant to fill space while everyone waited for the inevitable. And then the microphone was opened for questions. Brandon stood. He walked to the center aisle with the confidence of a man who believed he held the knife and the courtroom. "Ms. Hart," he began, voice smooth enough to slice glass, "I want to speak on behalf of employees and shareholders who are concerned about your recent lack of focus." A ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. "Inconsistencies," Brandon continued. "Absences and personal distractions." His eyes flicked deliberately to the back of the room where Mark stood. Some might call it an inappropriate entanglement with staff. The silence was absolute. Olivia stood motionless behind the podium, her face drained of color. Mark's hands curled into fists. He should have expected this. Brandon was an expert at cruelty. But seeing it executed in front of hundreds of employees made his stomach twist. Brandon smiled like a wolf who tasted victory. "My question is this: how can anyone trust your leadership when your judgment is clearly compromised?" There it was. The public execution. Olivia lifted her chin slowly, like someone rising through deep water. She looked at Brandon, then the board members, then the sea of employees. And finally, Mark. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but it filled the auditorium. "Judgment," she said, "is exactly what I want to talk about." She paused just long enough for unease to stir. "For the past year, my daughter has not spoken a single word." A gasp rippled through the room. Brandon paled, realizing he had triggered something he could no longer control. "She lost her voice when her father walked out on us." Olivia continued, her steady tone cracking at the edges. "And for 12 months, I made every judgment I could to try to help her. I hired specialists, therapists, doctors. I threw money at the silence until I was drowning in it." The room was transfixed. And then she said, in a cruel prank orchestrated by some of my own employees, I was set up on a blind date with someone many of you consider invisible. Mark locked eyes with her. His pulse thundered. "That man," Olivia said, her voice strengthening, "is the reason my daughter smiled for the first time in a year. He is the reason she reached out to another child. He is the reason she wakes up every morning and looks for her crayons and her stones and her stories." People shifted, stunned. Brandon's expression crumbled. "His name is Mark Bennett," she said clearly. "And he used to be one of the most gifted pediatric speech therapists in the state, but he judged himself broken after losing his wife. He hid that brilliance behind a mop and a uniform." The truth detonated across the room. And this morning, Olivia whispered, tears finally welling, my daughter looked at me and spoke her first word in a year. She said, "Mommy," because of him. Silence. Then emotions surged like a tidal wave. One person began clapping, then another. Then the entire room rose in a thunderous standing ovation that shook the walls. Not for the CEO, but for the mother, for the child, for the man who had saved them both. Brandon Cole stood frozen as two security officers approached him quietly. And in the back of the room, Mark Bennett closed his eyes as the sound washed over him, realizing that the life he buried was no longer content to stay underground. Something had shifted. Something irreversible. Something that felt almost like destiny. The echoes of the standing ovation followed Mark Bennett into the elevator, like a warmth he was unprepared to feel. He pressed his palms against the cool metal walls and let out a shaky breath, overwhelmed by the weight of what had just unfolded. For so long, praise had been a foreign language, and now it clung to him with surprising force. He closed his eyes, steadying himself, knowing everything had changed in ways he had never expected. When the elevator doors opened into the quiet marble lobby, Olivia Hart stood waiting for him. She looked almost fragile in the bright lights, her charcoal suit still immaculate. But her guarded posture softened. Her gaze held something raw, something grateful, something entirely human. "So," she said with a tired smile that reached only halfway to her eyes, "Director of the Foundation. The job is yours if you want it." Mark stared, taking in the enormity of her words. A year ago, he had hidden behind a mop, and silence, refusing to let anyone demand hope from him. Months ago, he believed his life was nothing more than grief and routine. Even days ago, he doubted he had any right to help another child again. But now he thought of Mia's drawings, her fragile courage, her first whispered word, and he felt his resistance melt. "Olivia," he said softly, "after everything you said today, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to," she whispered, stepping closer. "You healed my daughter. And I think you healed yourself too, at least a little." A single tear escaped him before he realized it. Olivia reached up with a trembling hand and brushed it away with the gentlest touch he had felt in years. He exhaled, releasing a quiet agony he had carried too long. "The joke that was meant to humiliate us," she murmured, "ended up saving us." He nodded, meeting her gaze. "It did." For a moment they simply stood there, suspended between past wounds and unfamiliar hope. Then Olivia leaned in, and Mark met her halfway. Their kiss was soft, steady, full of promise. Something delicate and life-altering took root in that breathless moment. A year later, the world had shifted completely. The Maya's Voice Foundation opened in a renovated brick building near the river, nestled between a bakery and an art studio. Inside, warm yellows and soft blues covered the walls, decorated with crooked, joy-filled drawings created by the children who found refuge there. A giant beanbag shaped like a smiling monster sat proudly in a corner. Nothing looked like an office. Everything looked like a beginning. In a sunlit therapy room, Mark sat on the floor across from a small boy who had not spoken in 2 months after witnessing a terrible accident. Mark did not interrogate or coax. Instead, he worked a lump of blue clay with quiet focus, letting the boy watch until curiosity pulled him forward. When the child finally pointed at the clay, Mark offered him a piece with a patient smile. It was the first step. It was enough. At 5 o'clock, Mark left the foundation without guilt. The old version of himself would have worked until exhaustion collapsed him. The new version knew where he belonged next. He drove through a peaceful suburb lined with oak trees until he reached a warm house filled with laughter. Shoes were scattered across the porch, evidence of childhood chaos. When he stepped inside, Olivia was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by Lego pieces, as Chloe and Mia constructed a castle under siege by a red dragon. "Your magical night has arrived," Mark announced. Olivia looked up at him with a happy glow that made the room feel warmer. The girls ran to him shouting, "Dad," and wrapped themselves around his legs. He lifted them both easily, marveling at the weight of joy he finally understood how to carry. A few weeks later, beneath the shade of an old oak in their backyard, Mark and Olivia said their vows. Only Chloe, holding wildflowers, and Mia carrying 2 simple rings, bore witness. Mia spoke freely now, her voice bubbling with life as she narrated the moment. When they kissed, the girls tossed petals into the air. Later, as twilight settled, the 4 of them lay on a blanket, watching the first stars shimmer. "You know," Olivia whispered, "Brandon tried to ruin our lives." Mark looked at the sky. And what happened? She laced her fingers through his. "He introduced me to my husband, and under those quiet stars, Mark realized he had finally stepped into the life he was meant to live." The next morning, sunlight spilled across the small kitchen of Mark Bennett's apartment, turning dust motes into drifting sparks. Chloe sat at the table, kicking her heels against the chair as she drew another picture of the carousel at Lincoln Park. Mark poured coffee, though he barely tasted it. His thoughts drifted back to the penthouse, to the silent girl tracing red lines on his hand, to the look on Olivia Hart's face when she found her daughter's drawing. Something had shifted. Something permanent. His phone buzzed. A message. Short. Hesitant in a way that did not match the woman who ruled 40 floors of corporate ambition. "Thank you for yesterday." Mia slept peacefully. She held the stone. Mark read the words twice, 3 times. He set the mug down before his shaking hand spilled it. He had not meant to change anything. He had only meant to honor the promise he made in the park. But now, without warning, responsibility tightened around his chest like a new kind of grief. Not crushing this time, but awakening. Chloe glanced up. "Dad, are you okay?" He forced a smile that felt too fragile. "Yes, sweetheart. Just thinking." A knock sounded at the door. Mark frowned. No one knocked on their door this early. When he opened it, Olivia stood in the hallway, dressed not in a tailored suit, but in a simple coat, her hair still damp from a rushed shower. She held a paper bag from the bakery down the street and looked almost embarrassed. "I did not want to text this," she said quietly. "I wanted to say it in person." Mark stepped aside. Chloe lit up at the sight of her. "Hi, Miss Olivia. Do you want to see my drawing?" Olivia smiled soft and real and nodded. As Chloe chattered excitedly, Olivia turned to Mark, her voice barely above a breath. "Mia asked for you this morning," she said. She did not speak. She placed your stone on the breakfast table and pointed to the door. She swallowed. "I think she wants you to come back today." Mark felt the world tilt a slow, gentle shift he was powerless to stop. He whispered, "I will." Olivia exhaled as if she had been holding that breath all night. They stood there not as CEO and janitor, but as 2 parents navigating the fragile beginnings of something that looked dangerously like hope. And for the first time in years, Mark did not feel like he was walking toward failure. He felt like he was walking toward purpose. In the end, this story reminds us of a truth. Every expert in trauma and human resilience understands healing rarely happens in clinics alone. It happens in connection, in presence, in the quiet courage of people who choose to show up for one another. Mark and Olivia's journey illustrates how a single moment of compassion can redirect an entire life, and how the voices we think are lost often return when we feel truly seen. If stories like this move you, if they remind you of the quiet power we each hold, consider liking and subscribing. It helps more people discover narratives that inspire hope instead of fear, connection instead of cynicism. Before you go, share your voice too. Comment with just one short phrase, no more than 3 words, that captures what you feel right now. Let it be your moment of truth.